Okay, hello. I hope this works. And I'm making a video on the theory. This is a little more theoretical and the practice of sculpting. Just for those 5 people who might watch this stuff. Okay, now I've done this a few times, but if you go into this time, I didn't even put it in the advanced issues, although I think some of these issues are really advanced. We have these lesson sets, and I have a series of videos associated with sculpting, a whole bunch, okay? I don't have this overview one, and I'm going to try to talk about the theory a little bit. And the key file to find is a file in Chapter 1, Project Finance Models. I changed the letters around here a little bit, and we go to Sculpting course, and there's one I have that's named Sculpting Course Final. Oh, look at this. These extensions are in here now because I was on the phone with Microsoft for a couple of hours this morning because I firmly believe, I could be wrong, there's a bug in Excel 2016. Now, here is the big deal with sculpting, I think. There's a lot of practical issues that you can solve if you use two things together, if you use some formulas together with some functions and some kind of nice little Excel things. But before I do that, now if you didn't, hopefully you didn't watch me do too much of this stuff in other videos. I'm going to start at the bottom. At the bottom we have some here. In this case we have a target debt service coverage ratio of 1.2, and it's a semi-annual model. So there's the IRR here on the equity cash flows, and I hope we have an IRR on the debt cash flows somewhere here. That's not exactly the same as the debt. Don't worry about that because the debt isn't compounded correctly when you just divide the interest rate by 2. So when you get the debt IRR, it's the real economic IRR. Don't worry about that right now. So I said this is the project IRR, and then we have the equity IRR. Okay, and when we do all of this, there's the cash flow available for debt service. There's an adjustment you might have to make for the change in the debt service reserve account. And there's a very big change right at the very end. In this case, it was a 12-month debt service reserve account. And then we have the repayment and some fees potentially we have on a letter of credit. And we get down to equity cash flows. And the cash flow available for debt service includes here some taxes somewhere. Okay, here's our basic cash flow. It includes interest, income, and taxes. Those are the nightmare kind of things, at least right now, in my opinion. Now, before I start talking about anything technical, let's just understand how some of these things work. I'm going to take the debt service coverage ratio out of the letter of credit, out of the CFADS, and I'm going to not use a letter of credit. So now we have a funded debt service reserve account that's funded for 12 months. We have an interest income rate. We have a fee on the letter of credit. We start with some operating cash flow. And I'm focusing now on some of these things. Now, we have a debt to capital ratio of 1.6, a constraint of 90%. So I'm going to put 1.3. I'm going to make that. Oh, let's put 1.15. Okay, we're still below the debt to capital constraint, but later we'll put an 80% in. Now, let's try just the first thing. Okay, let's say if we have right now we have a debt service reserve account. It's 12 months. here's part of the funding, here's our project cost, and we have a letter of credit. Now, if we put the debt service reserve account in the cash flow available for debt service, you see we get a little bit higher. Okay, and now, and this is the type, here's why I'm showing you, this is the type of thing you want to do. Now, if we have a maximum debt to capital ratio of 80%, everything's still working, one should not work. Yeah. And then we put this, and actually it still gives us, it's still a little better to include the debt service reserve account, even if we're right at 80%. Now I'm going to leave it off. I'm going to put this back to 90%. And now let's say our so right now we have 11.36 equity IRR, and now we put a debt service reserve account in. I mean, a letter of credit guaranteed by a parent. I'm at my daughter's right now. I guarantee her. She's got a letter of credit with me that I kind of guarantee. I guess she sends me an email when she needs money. Okay? Then you can see that that has a big effect. Now, if we put in a 80% constraint, so we're constrained by the, it still has an effect. This was about 1% effect. This is about 2% effect. So you can see it's a bigger number now. If, of course, if we put a fee rate of 2% or something, you could see, you can let's put this in too. So I'm kind of messing around too much. It's still helping us to have the letter of credit 12.46, 11.88. Okay. Let's put it back to 0.5%. If we had an interest income rate of 5%, then it doesn't really matter very much. So you can see it's this interest income penalty. And if it's 0.001%, which is kind of more like it, it's probably about 0% these days, maybe negative in Europe. You can kind of see the effect of all these. So that's why you want to program and get all of these things right. And what I just did, don't want some massive, horrible copy and paste kind of routines. They would just be so difficult in this case, I can't tell you. And we might want to see how this whole thing works if we have kind of a really low tax rate. Say we're Apple computers, that they would pay less than this, I think. So now we can do the same thing. So I don't know, there seems to be less effect with no taxes. So it's important to get the tax effects all in here, and as well as the interest during construction and everything else. And I'm going on, but I think you can see some of the issues. You can see the issue of changing the maximum debt to capital constraint. If we put 15 years in, of course, we get a less of an impact. Now, I'm sorry, 9.29 versus this. And if we put 6 months debt service reserve account, it's less of an impact too. So now it's kind of a small impact. Well, this one, let's put that in. Now let's make it 25 years. So you want to make it very flexible, so we get a much higher IRR here. We've got an almost 90% debt to capital ratio, and now we're 9.82, so it's only about 1% here. Okay, again, if we put in a 24 months debt service reserve account, oops, that's the wrong one. 18 versus 15. Okay, so you can start to see some of the pain of the debt service reserve account. If I put 0 in the debt service reserve account, it doesn't make any difference, and we get 20. So let's put 6 months in and see how low it goes, and we can see how close we can get to the kind of original answer when we had 0. Okay, 24. All right, those are the things you want to do. Now the question is how to get there. I think even though I was kind of messing around, that's exactly what I hope you want to do to understand some of these structuring elements. Now to get there, you begin, so I have I've shown you this a few times, you have some basic formulas, and then you have a new formula when you have a debt to capital constraint, when you have multiple debt issues, when you have a model that's perhaps semi-annual, monthly, and then you have semi-annual payments. When you have interest income, things start to get horrible. When you have fees, you have to modify the formulas. And then if you have fees, you might have to, you'll have a circular reference, and then taxes and interest income all together. So the very first one, you just go through this and you just try the fundamental formulas. The fundamental two formulas are this and this. Okay? And then you realize, it's a big trick to realize the LLCR is the same as the DSCR when you have perfect sculpting. Now, if of course, if the DSCR changed over time, this trick wouldn't work and it would be a little bit of a mess. Okay? But that way you can, if the debt to capital constraint, remember we put in a cap debt to capital, if that constraint applies, you still have to compute the repayment, but the repayment by definition has to be on a higher DSCR than the target DSCR. You're above the minimum debt service coverage because you're constrained, and the technique is just to use the LLCR. Now, when you have multiple debt issues, it's not nearly as hard as you might think. All you have to do is work through the basic formulas and realize the DSCR is still the cash flow divided by all the other debt service plus this debt service plus this facility you're going to use to capture the remainder and do the sculpting on. And then you can just work through the formulas. And so far we have no a circular reference. And then this is a painful kind of thing. You might have an annual model, a semi-annual model, and then a monthly model. And I work through all kind of the formulas with the lookup function and everything else. And then you have to do a little bit of mathematics and realize that the formula you use to compute the net present value is a little bit different. And I hope you saw that on our very first case, I hope I put an interest rate that was not constant. I didn't. I put a constant interest rate somewhere. I better have changed the interest rate to make it non-constant. Just a minute. I didn't do it here. And here we... interest rate was still flat, so I guess I just changed the interest rate over here. And to do that, you use this, I guess you do it with a sum product. You put an interest rate index in, and you use the sum product. Now, I think the theory of whether you should, when you're doing a base case, include an increasing credit spread that prompts you to refinance is a really interesting issue, but I'm not dealing with this. And then when you have fees, you think it's all simple, but it's not that simple. You have to use a different formula for the DSCR and a different formula for the NPV. You take away the fees. I had to work through this. I kind of did a trial and error. I'm sorry about that, but I did. And then when you put letter of credit fees in, here's the problem. The letter of credit can... And this one, there was, you need a copy and paste, because the fees on the letter of credit depend on the DSRA requirement, and the DSRA requirement depends on the size of the debt. Then we have a simple one, and there's a circular reference again associated with taxes. You can use a copy and paste approach, sorry, or you can use a function. And this basically, I force you to try to compute the function. Now, then it gets really painful, because then we say the DSRA might be affected. We might have a positive interest income. In fact, you might have a negative interest income rate. And if you're really being careful and accurate, you want to reflect that, and that creates another circular reference. I demonstrate how to do that with a function or a macro. And then, oh my God, then we have the debt to capital constraint with the fees, and then you have to use a different formula for this LLCR that's used as a test for the debt to capital constraint. You have to add the fees into the bottom. Again, for me, this was a little bit of a trial and error to get it right. Okay? And I don't care. You think you're arrogant and you think you're really good, and I don't think I'm very good. But, you know, you might say, I have much better things to do. I'm using a different technique. I'm so good at copying and pasting. I think working through these formulas and really understanding when these formulas apply is probably a worthwhile thing to do. If you want to be the best in the world at some of this stuff, you don't go to something in London where you have model off. Oh, God, what the hell that must be. You go and you try to work through the formulas and understand some of the Excel techniques. So then we started getting towards the end. Then we have the taxes and the DSRA and the letter of credit. And then I put tax depreciation in, and I have you do some exercises, not everything. I don't make you redo the whole function and everything else, because those functions get difficult. And then I have a nice little simple exercise on something I thought was impossible to do. But again, the trick is using a formula to solve it. If you put say, we have the debt service reserve account, we're going to use that to pay off the final maturity of the debt. You try that, and you try your stupid copy and paste. Maybe that would work. Maybe it's not so hard, but you can do it without any circularity if there are no taxes and no interest income. And what you have to do is just do it in kind of two steps. You put the DSRA change as divided by the debt service coverage ratio, and if you notice, what happened here is that when we kind of got to the end, we have oops, this, I think I better put yeah, the debt service reserve account is in the maturity, and we have a big payment from the DSRA in the very last period. And we include that in CFADS, and we still get the right number. You don't believe me? It works. And with a formula, you don't even have to use some kind of copy and paste thing. And so I have you go through that one. I think you only have to fill in a couple of lines. And then this is the one we just were finished with. Then you use the same sort of principle, but you realize that the present value of the debt service reserve account is you make your adjustments. I can't even remember it and say it. I really almost have to keep this open when I retry some of this. But you include the debt service reserve account in repayment, and you compute the present value of the debt service reserve account changes, and you divide them by the DSCR. Oh my gosh, remembering all these silly formulas, what a pain that would be. And that's why I've tried to put some of those formulas, there's my Microsoft stuff, I've tried to put all those formulas down here below that so you can kind of have a little reference. I don't know if that's going to help you, and I don't know why I kind of put this up here for free, but what the heck. You know, I'm hoping to one day to get one class, just one goddamn class out of this whole thing, okay? Oops, you don't want to see that. I'm just going to say goodbye, okay? And email me, call me, and make me happy. Bye.